Should Venom have broken October's box office record?
Stick around to find out. So tonight we went and watched Venom. We're going to go over the good, the bad, go a little bit of Easter eggs, little things that I picked up during the movie. Basically the movie starts out with Tom Hardy, who plays Eddie Brock. He is a journalist that does video recordings of all his interviews and everything. You might be used to like the comics where he's a photographer working for the Daily Bugle. They kind of changed the storyline on this and made it a little bit more new school. And I think that actually did add a good aspect to it. Like it updated it a little bit. So basically he's a journalist and then he gets a exclusive offer and he didn't want to take the job, but he was able to get an interview with Carlton Drake, who is a scientist, I guess you could say.
He is billionaire, scientist, philanthropist, but has a dark side to him.
So Eddie Brock kind of could tell he was a bad egg. He didn't want anything to do with it, but he was kind of forced into it by his boss. So then he was telling his fiance at the time, and she
was an attorney for a company that was hired by Drake's company. So her company worked for Drake.
Yep. So they were at their house, and he goes down to the kitchen for a glass of orange juice, I believe it was. And he noticed that his fiance got an email, and it was basically dirt on Drake.
It was a case pertaining to a lawsuit against Drake's company.
Correct. So he then went to go take the interview, and it was supposed to be basically a piece on how brilliant he was and everything. And Eddie Brock, being Eddie Brock, turns that around, and he tries to go after him for the dirty side that he shouldn't have known in the first place, and it definitely hurt him in the long run since the interview got stopped early, and then as soon as he walked out the door, his fiance was there and basically broke up with him.
Right, because she got fired for giving Eddie information even though she didn't give it to him. He stole it from her, but he screwed her over by using information that he found out from her email.
So going on that, right then and there, I think that would have been, if you're a fan of the comics, that all seems like Eddie Brock. Like, he gets fired, he loses his fiance, that's where the anger comes in, that's where Eddie Brock gets angry, the symbiote is like, I sense your anger. This movie took a total turn on that. Instead of going that way,
the way that they explained it was he was just a compatible match to the symbiote.
They compared it to like donating organs to like patients.
Sure.
Which is a completely different take on it. And in my opinion, I don't think it was a good one. So Eddie Brock gets fired. He kind of goes into a slump. And then one of the scientists that's at the facility that Drake is running...
The Life Research Center.
Yep. So the scientist, she's starting to get a self-conscious about it. She's getting, her conscious is coming into play.
Sure.
And she's realizing that what they're doing is poor. They're testing on humans with these alien artifacts that they found in outer space that she's watched them kill. And it's simply for science, but at the same time they're testing humans and she doesn't agree with it. So she contacts Eddie Brock and tries to get him to do a story on it. And at first he declines. And then he calls her back up and says, I'm in. So he goes to the facility and he ends up seeing somebody that you'll see earlier in the movie. It's a homeless woman. He breaks her out and then turns out she was infected with the symbiote and that leeches onto him. And it just turns out they were compatible and that's how it sticks. I don't think that is a very good way to introduce Venom to it. The parts that I didn't like, Venom being anti-Venom within the first 40 minutes of the movie. So Venom is supposed to be a villain, and he was never a villain in this movie. There was never once that he was actually a villain, because even when he did the things he did, it was to the bad people. So he was kind of like that anti-hero through the whole thing.
And he had a crisis of conscience when I totally was not expecting that.
Yeah.
It didn't fit for me.
You want to go over the good and the bad?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then we'll kind of get back to the plot afterwards. After we go over the good and the bad, we can talk about that throughout. The first good thing in this movie, the comedy. Like, there was some parts where it felt forced and didn't really work, but the little one-liners that kind of just almost looked like they were improv worked perfectly.
That was one of my favorite parts of this movie, was the comedy, because I was totally not expecting comedy in this movie at all, just based on the backstory to Venom. I wasn't expecting there to be any laughter, and there were a couple times that actually made me laugh out loud.
And the trailer made it seem very dark and gritty, even though it's not a rated R. And I honestly think it could have done better if they made it rated R and got a little bit darker with it.
Sure.
But still had that comedy like a Deadpool. Not as much like fifth wall breaking, but just a little bit darker in the parts that it needed to be. One thing that Venom wanted to do all the time was bite somebody's head off, but yet they never showed him biting anybody's head off.
Right.
So, but the comedy, there was one scene that you mentioned earlier that was that made you laugh.
It was it was a scene where Eddie was fleeing on a motorcycle, and he was gonna totally crash, wipe out, probably kill himself, and Venom saved him, and he goes, "Oh my God, thank you!" And Venom says, "You are welcome," and it just totally took me.
It was the timing.
It was the timing. It totally took me off guard. Was not expecting that at all. And that kind of goes into the whole comedy thing. I wasn't expecting their back and forth, Venom's and Eddie Brock's, to be funny.
Yeah.
Because I always take it as Venom was really just kind of taking him over. And in this movie, it was that a little bit, but not as much as I expected.
The next good thing about it, I think, definitely the casting. I think Tom Hardy played a good Eddie Brock.
And Tom Hardy goes into our good and bad here, so...
Yeah, there's caveats with it. We'll get into that when we get in the bad, but he played a good Eddie Brock. I think Drake was very well. What? He played a good villain. This is very much, there's a lot of, especially MCU movies where there's so many characters that you have to focus on. You have to make sure that they're good for the part. And this movie really only focused on 4 people. The whole movie. There was some background cast, but it was really just the 4 people: Eddie Brock, his fiance, Drake, and
the doctor.
And the doctor. That was really it. There was some other people, but they were meaningless.
They were ancillary parts. They were not meaningful to the movie in any other sense. So, next thing we'll talk about for good is the chase scene. Now, this was something that you and I had talked about prior to filming today. But tell me why you thought it was so good.
If you've watched Black Panther, it's very similar to that. Even Deadpool, both the Deadpools, I think, they all had those car chase scenes, and a lot of movies do it. And this did it really well because it had the motorcycle instead of just cars driving everywhere, and it had the symbiote coming out of his back and pulling, the whole thing. It's gonna go into the bad, but the CGI on that scene wasn't terrible. There was one scene where he was driving down, and he needed to there was
where the drone was behind?
There was drones coming behind, and the symbiote pulled the door off the back and then used it as a shield as he's driving. And then another scene where he got pinned in between 2 vehicles that were both shooting at him.
And the
symbiote took the steering wheel on both and spread it out.
That was great.
And that scene was very well executed, and it looked really good. But that's because a lot of it wasn't CGI. It was a lot of just actual cars getting crashed and everything. And that makes it feel more real, and you feel like that actually could happen.
Yeah.
Same thing with all the Deadpool and all those. They all feel like that could happen. Whenever the CGI was in it, it's a different story, but we'll get into that with the bad.
One of the other things I really liked about this is that the movie did not seem like it dragged on at all.
It didn't. I literally sat there and it felt like it went by so quickly that I was like, is there another scene coming up? Was the third act not the third act? Because it felt like it was 45 minutes to an hour into the movie that it felt like it was almost over. And I'm like, no, there's got to be another scene. Now I'm looking at my watch and it's been almost 2 hours. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive.
It really is. I mean, there are some movies that you guys all know. I mean, sometimes you go to a movie and you're like, when is this thing going to be over with? And at no point during this movie did I feel that way.
Even MCU movies. Now, granted, they do it a lot to build a backstory, and I guess that can be added to a con side of this movie. The bad part is there wasn't too much backstory. Like, once the action started, it never really stopped, and the action started about maybe a half hour into it. There was never really any character development without action scenes, but I don't think in this movie it needed it at the same time, so it kind of was it worked in its favor.
Absolutely.
The other really good thing about this movie is the soundtrack, and if you guys haven't listened to it, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play Music, listen to it. It's an amazing soundtrack. You have Eminem, you have a couple different ones that are all based on this movie alone. They're all original tracks for this movie. They're mainly hip-hop driven, so if you like hip-hop, but in all honesty, it's a great soundtrack. One of the best soundtracks I've had or that I've heard from a movie in a long time.
And they are hip-hop driven, but when you're listening to them during the context of the movie, they don't feel hip-hop driven.
Yeah.
I don't know how that may not be coming out the way that I mean it to, but it doesn't sound like you're just listening to a hip-hop song. It feels very relevant to the scene that it's in.
Yep. And that actually is going to kind of lead into bad. I think the soundtrack is better than the movie was. So the plot was terrible.
It was spotty at best. And it was certainly... I'm going to defer to you on this one because you are really into the Venom and the backstory more so than I am, just to give you that disclaimer, guys. Josh is certainly more up to it than I am. However, it just, even for someone that knows, I know a fair amount, and someone that knows as much as I do, certainly did not fit what I was expecting.
So I grew up on the original 90s Spider-Man cartoon, and even then I followed all the Spider-Man cartoons after that. I've read quite a few Spider-Man comics growing up, and all of them have a very similar story for Venom. They all make slight changes, the introduction of like anti-Venom getting later into it. But the main thing about Venom, and this is where I think Spider-Man 3 is the only praise I'll ever give it, is that it captured Venom's origin story, I think, better than the Venom movie did, because it not only was it just more relevant to the comics, it just made more sense. Like, the symbiote in Spider-Man 3 fed off of Eddie Brock's anger. Like, it led to his... And yes, Spider-Man was involved, but like his anger towards Spider-Man, he lost Gwen Stacy, lost his job, all that is what fed the symbiote to him to make him just go full berserk into a Venom and make him a rage machine. Now, this movie is just, they happen to be compatible, and he kind of gets conned into being Venom. And then at the same time, Eddie Brock will turn Venom into a good guy. And it just, it didn't really make sense. It didn't flow very well at all.
And they were talking about compatibility between the symbiotes and humans, and they had tried them on several humans already.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Eddie Brock was down in the dumps about losing his job, losing his fiance.
But they cut a lot of that scene out, too. Like, it like, all of a sudden skipped 6 months ahead.
They did. But at this point, he just seemed kind of lethargic. He didn't seem angry, upset, things that you would expect. But that's one of the things that didn't make sense to me.
Like, when the scientists called him and they were like, she was like, I want you to take, he's just like, no.
Yeah, he just said, I don't want anything to do with it. Why are you coming to me? Say one of the things he said in the movie, find yourself another white knight.
Yep.
He said, I don't want anything to do with it.
But he didn't seem severely depressed. He didn't seem severely angry. He was just kind of placent. Like that, he was just there. And I mean, I can get that. That's kind of like a depression funk, but it has nothing to do with Eddie Brock and Venom in any of the comics, and it just didn't really make sense. And then going on to that, the symbiote there's 3 or 4 symbiotes throughout the whole movie. One of them connects with Drake, the bad guy in the movie, a stereotypical bad guy. He's been a bad guy since the first second in the movie, where he's basically trying to kill people to save science and find out what these alien things can do.
Trying to further research.
Yeah, but he has no moral compass on it. And so he's that stereotypical bad guy. He's not like your Thanos that has more of a backstory. He's not your Vulture that has that back. Like, he doesn't have a backstory on, like, he's doing this like, he has his reasons where you can kind of understand why that person's being bad. This is just, oh, he's a bad guy.
Right.
And it's very stereotypical, so that I didn't like. And then, so he ends up getting a symbiote called
Riot.
And it looks like Carnage, and I honestly thought it was going to be Carnage. Actually had red to it. It had a lot of Carnage-like features, like spikes and stuff that were starting to come out whenever he needed them. The sickle coming out of his hand.
Exactly. Yep.
A lot of things that Carnage has in the comics, but they called him Riot. They never called him Carnage. He wasn't Cassidy. So Venom is the good guy through the whole movie, which, in my opinion, should not be. If you're going to make a Venom movie, you need to make him be the bad guy for at least 3/4 of the movie. And then have him maybe, like, have a change of heart. But Venom is a villain. That is what he was created for. And I don't think he should have been created in a movie to just start out as a good guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going anywhere.
Yeah, when Riot becomes, a partner with Drake, Venom was talking to Eddie about him and telling Eddie that where Venom is from, he's kind of a loser too. And to me, that made no sense. That I didn't think that fit in the backstory to Venom at all.
Yeah, he basically said that, yeah, we're compatible because we're both losers. Now, why the symbiote is saying that, I don't get it at all. The second small bad thing with it, besides the whole plot, and going back to how the casting was good with Tom Hardy, I think he did good. He was a good Eddie Brock. However, he has an accent. He has a very strong accent naturally.
And I'm going to stop you here because I'll own this one. Because this is something I said, and I know it's petty and I know that it's small, but I know Tom Hardy does have a very strong accent, and you could tell on several occasions that he was hiding it. Now, there were a lot of parts that he did okay, but it was just one of those things that it just didn't flow. It didn't fit in the movie again. And for some reason, that just kind of stuck in my craw. That really kind of bugged me a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe more than it should have.
No, but it leaked through, and through the whole movie, the movie takes place in San Francisco, and he had this, like, Boston, Brooklyn accent through the whole thing. Like, he was trying to act like he was from the city.
Right.
Which made it even more odd. But then you're trying to do an accent on top of hiding your own accent from a different... It was very convoluted in trying to explain that, but when you listen to it, if you actually pay attention to how he's talking, sometimes it's good. Like, there's certain things where just... You wouldn't even think about it, especially when he was acting tweaked out.
Yeah.
The accent didn't come through there. But then certain times when he was actually trying to have a serious conversation...
Just have a regular conversation.
That's when it came through. And it definitely made you like, what is going on here with the acting and everything? Other than that, the acting was really good, though. I mean, the acting was spot on.
It really was.
The CGI was not, however. That belonged in 2001. Sorry.
All good.
Preach. Yeah, I was saying it to him earlier. So the Spider-Man 3 reference again, there were certain aspects in that where the CGI was a million times better than the CGI in Venom for Venom's character. The one iconic scene from Spider-Man 3 where Venom first makes his appearance to talk to Sandman and he's crawling along the wall and you have the face kind of ripped apart to reveal Eddie Brock's face. All way better done than whatever was in Venom. This looked like a computerized video game ooze covering his skin on top of actual film.
What?
Which is inexcusable. For the time difference,
it really
for the time difference, it should be way better now, and it did not feel that way.
In point of reference, Iron Man came out in 2008, so you're talking 10 years ago. I still watch that movie. I've actually just watched it recently in Blu-ray, and yes, you can tell there's CGI in the movie, but certain scenes where you know it's not Robert Downey Jr. standing in a suit, and it's CGI, that you can't even tell that it's CGI. There was not one spot where Venom looked even close to real. Yeah. It looked like a video game. And it's very, very inexcusable for 2018.
Yeah, that was really a big downfall for me.
Yeah.
It just, at no point did the transformations feel like I felt that they should feel for 2018. Yeah. As advanced as technology has become, I just thought, I expected more, I should say.
Yeah. A few more renders, get it a little bit more solidified. It just looked like all the edges were too glossy because they were trying to make it look somewhat liquidy. It looked like he was covered in like Nickelodeon Gak that was black.
Good reference.
That's what it looked like. And on top of that, we were talking about the big final scene here. So this was a convoluted fight scene. One main issue that I had with it was there were a lot of times it went too close up to where you have Venom and Riot fighting, but it actually showed them fighting so close that you're only getting from like the chest to the head when they're swinging, and it made it so you can't really see anything except the bad CGI. And then on top of that, there was something that Jeff absolutely hated, was the combining part.
Yeah, to me, again, another thing that made no sense. So at one point they were fighting, and the symbiotes were ripping apart from both humans that they had combined with, and then all of a sudden all four were in one conglomeration of Riot. And I almost leaned over and I said, are they all one now? And I'm like, I'm just going to shut up. I'm not going to say anything, and I'll wait and see what happens. And we found out shortly thereafter, but to all combine to one?
I get they were trying to do something different and showing that the symbiotes can combine, but at the same time, that just means you put two people inside each other.
No, 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 no!
So what good did that provide to the movie?
Nothing at all. It did nothing for the movie. Another weird part that we didn't even discuss, Eddie Brock kissed Venom. Like, that's
a thing.
They made out.
That happened.
It was weird.
It was a female Venom.
But it was the symbiote that was doing it. And it was her tongue that was in his mouth.
Yeah.
It was weird. There was so many weird aspects to this movie that I think that if it came out 2004, it might have done well.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think if it came out the year after Spider-Man 3 came out, the CGI wasn't great, the plot was all over the place, but
it would have fit for the time.
It would have, because you would have been repairing what Topher Grace did to Venom then. Now, I think there's a good movie in it. I think it was rushed. I think they needed a lot more work on the animations, the CGI, and the rendering. There was a lot of little things about the movie that could have been changed, but they were just trying to get it out for this timeline.
Which doesn't make sense to me because, yes, it would have cost them more money and cost them more time, but the movie's going to make it back anyway, regardless.
It did. I mean, opening weekend, it made $80 million.
Broke the October record.
Going back to the plot here, so the middle is basically, it didn't feel like there was middle. It kind of felt like it went from the beginning to the end. It didn't feel like there was a second act really in there. Either that or the first act was so short and it was the first 10 minutes of the movie. So basically, Venom and Riot fight. Venom wins. Riot explodes in a space shuttle going back up because they were trying to get the symbiote Riot that was on Drake was trying to convince Drake to send a rocket back into space to collect more symbiotes to basically take over Earth. And that's where Venom was like, but I like it here now and I don't want to take over Earth. Like, it didn't make any sense at all.
And Eddie says, well, what made you change your mind? And Venom says, you do.
And it's not Venom. That didn't feel like Venom at all. Like, Venom's not a softy sweetheart for Eddie Brock. Like, they work together because they're angry and they both hate the world. And now he's basically saying, no, I want to save the world.
Right.
So the end of the movie, basically you have Eddie Brock and his ex-fiancée sitting there, and she thinks that Venom is gone. She thinks that Venom was destroyed when Venom was falling from the space shuttle, saved Eddie Brock because of the fire, because his weakness is fire and sound, as most of you know. If you are into Venom at all, or any Spider-Man, you should know those weaknesses. So he was falling through fire. It looked like Venom was detaching from him, and then he falls into the water. Then it cuts to a scene of them talking. I felt like he probably lost him. I thought there was going to be like a scene later on where he was going to get him back or something, like, because I honestly thought he'd lost Venom. Then all of a sudden you hear Venom talking in his head while he's having the conversation.
Which, that was kind of funny too, because one of the things that he said was, or the thing that he said was, oh, she doesn't know that I'm still here.
Yeah. So, I mean, the movie's pretty cut and dry. There was no plot twist. There was nothing that was unexpected. I think once you started the movie and you saw that Venom was going to be a good guy, you knew what was going to happen and how it was going to end. And that's basically exactly how it played out. It was a fun flick to watch.
Sure.
It did not compare with the MCU movies at all.
No. And we did watch it in RPX, which is the upgraded movie experience with the improved sound, larger screen, better graphics.
Which probably might have made it look worse. If you watched it in regular format, the CGI might have looked better because it wasn't as detailed.
That's fair.
Definitely not one to watch in IMAX. I'll give you that right now. A couple little references that I saw right when the movie started, when the space shuttle crashed, and they had they were like, oh, everyone's dead and everything like that, and then they were looking and they found the person. And she goes, oh, Jameson's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that's from?
I don't.
So, the whole story about how Venom came to be in the Spider-Man universe is there was a rocket that came up, came back down. That's how it got onto the Earth. It basically crashed on the Hudson Bridge and like went into the Hudson River and or the Brooklyn Bridge, I think it was, and went into the Hudson River, and Spider-Man got it all over him. But the astronaut that went up and down is J. Jonah Jameson's son. So that was actually somewhat cool because they didn't reference any Spider-Man, but they did reference, they go, oh, Jameson's still alive. And they were referencing J. Jonah Jameson Jr. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That is cool.
One thing that I did not understand at all, every time that Eddie Brock grabbed a beer, he grabbed two and opened both.
He did.
No idea why.
I think he just knew the way his body was feeling. He knew he was drinking them both.
But they never showed him do it. Like, it almost like he was opening for somebody else and nobody was there. Like, he wanted that we there the whole time. Like, Venom's head's just going to pop out.
And have the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
very odd.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that during the movie.
All
I thought about
noted
was
it twice.
he just wanted more beer, and why go to the fridge twice if you don't have to?
I noticed it the once before, like, the whole meltdown scene of him losing his fiancée and everything. Mm-hmm. And I noticed it afterwards, before he ate all the frozen tater tots and the dirty chicken out of the out of the garbage.
Yeah.
Before he threw it up. Just little things that I noticed. There's probably a ton more, but, you know, we only saw one, so we're going to give it a score here. We haven't discussed what we're going to give it with each other. So it's going to be based on a scale from 1 to 10. I will let you go first.
I'm going to give it a 6.8. Reason being, there were things that I liked about the movie. I did have some expectations going in, and a lot of them weren't met, which is unfortunate. And maybe I shouldn't have expected anything going in. Maybe that would have made it a little different, but
I mean, it was overhyped. That hyped you up for it, so.
They did, and I think that's what they were looking for from a lot of people. And it wasn't what I was expecting. Not a terrible movie. I mean, I wouldn't call it a waste of money. I mean, it was entertaining, but if you're looking for something that you're going to walk out of there going, damn, that was just a great movie, I don't feel like this is it.
No. You said 6.8?
6.8, yeah.
That's gracious.
Okay.
We talked about it as soon as we got out, and I honestly wasn't a fan of the movie as soon as I got out. I watched the whole thing. I took it all in and tried to give it its chance. And maybe it's just the die-hard Spider-Man fan of me, where I've seen so many renditions of Venom being created in all the cartoons.
Which is going to make you more critical than me. Give it to me.
I'll give it a 5.5.
5.5.
5.5.
All right.
So what does that average out to?
6.1, 6.2.
Okay. So we'll round it up. 6.2. If you guys want to see any other movies, there are a bunch of movies coming out. The Spider-Man Into the Multiverse.
Yep.
That's coming out, and it's something that I'm looking forward to. If it's something you guys want to see, let me know, because we'll definitely go watch it together, and we'll review it for you, give our opinions on it. Other than that, we should come out with a new video next week regarding something. This is called Mish Mosh for a reason. We're kind of just mixing everything up. We want to do some food reviews, might do some food challenges, might play some Mad Libs. There's a whole bunch of things that we want to do with this channel, and the only way it'll grow is if you guys like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when we're posting the videos, and leave comments on what you like, what you dislike. This is our first video, so the tips that anything that we can do to make it better, constructive criticism.
Absolutely. We know we have room to improve.
Obviously.
But we're doing it for you guys.
So, until next time, again, like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Later.